I'm Sumana Misrazetz, the Interim Special Assistant to the President for Diversity and Inclusion. On behalf of OIDI and student engagement, I would like to welcome you to this important event. This is one in a series of diversity and inclusion programs that we've offered to the CCAC community this academic year. I want you to understand CCAC's continuing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm honored to welcome an amazing panel of speakers for today's topic of the power of student activism. I would like to welcome Mr. Rick Adams, Director of Sponsored Programs and Post-Award Administration at CCAC. Mr. Adams was a student activist, community organizer, civil rights leader, and he is currently the chair of the board of the Institute of the Black World in the 21st Century. I would like to also welcome Dr. Ralph Proctor, who is a professor of ethnic and diversity studies at Allegheny campus. Dr. Proctor is an iconic civil rights leader and social activist, and he has spent the majority of his life in the active pursuit of justice, equality, and freedom for all people. I would also like to welcome Dr. Jacqueline Cavalier, who is a professor of history at Allegheny campus, where she has taught for over 20 years. In addition to her instructional duties, she serves as the college-wide coordinator of civic engagement. Dr. Cavalier is also on the board of directors for the Battle of Homestead Foundation, where she oversees the archives and special collections project. And I would also like to welcome student Dawn Reese, who is a social work student at South Campus, president of the Society for Social Advocacy, member of PTK, and an honors scholar for the 1920 school year. She is involved with social justice in Pittsburgh through Partners in Justice and Pittsburgh Allyship. Thank you all for participating in today's event. I would like to turn it over now to Dr. Kitwana Schus, who is the Interim Special Civil Rights Compliance Officer and Adjunct Faculty in Ethnic and Diversity Studies. She will now present a wonderful pictorial on the history of the student activism movement. Enjoy the program. Thank you. Dr. Schus.
Good morning, everyone. So as Sumana said, I'm Katwana, and I'm excited to kind of kick off and set the stage for our panelists just to talk about the history and the power of student voice and protest throughout time. Like, we see it activated differently today, but it has its roots in the past. So we do have lessons that we can learn from. So just kind of a pictorial view to kind of give you all the sense of maybe juxtapose what's happening today with some of the things that have happened in the past, and see how students have been integral in the civil rights movement and our current civil rights and social justice movements, as well. So I'm excited that we're having our first program in our diversity and inclusion series for this academic year. And just like I said, a couple of slides just to kind of give you a pictorial overview. So this is a picture of the school desegregation process. So many of you may have heard of like the Little Rock Nine, which is pictured on the left, where there were 9 students who integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it was a huge ordeal at the time. It included like the National Guard being sent in, and it was a very risky and dangerous process. So we talk about student voice, but also student sacrifice. Like, these students, you can see, are being escorted in, 9 students, by the National Guard, and this was their experience at the beginning of the academic year, just trying to fight for an opportunity for equality and equal education. Autherine Lucy is the first African-American student to integrate the University of Mississippi, and like Little Rock Nine, she ended up needing to be escorted in, by federal guards. She was eventually like expelled for her own safety, is how they put it, so that, you know, she was met by mobs on a daily basis. But she's historic in being, you know, the first student, African American student, to integrate the University of Alabama. And in the bottom, many of you may have heard of James Meredith, who was the first African American student to integrate the University of Mississippi, or Ole Miss. And also you see him being escorted in. You see pictures of, you know, guardsmen in the background too. So you can see that it wasn't an easy process, especially, you know, at the post-secondary level and in college, for students to integrate during that time period. So that is a means of students using their voice, and I think their being, to sacrifice and pave the way for the types of educational opportunities many of us, you know, enjoy today. Sit-ins was another popular form of protest, or method that students engaged in. This was actually the second wind of the civil rights movement. Many of you may be familiar with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the work that he did to bring civil rights in the 1950s and 1960s. But there was a second wave where college students, in, you know, Black and white, and in all creeds and colors in between, that work towards dismantling a lot of those systems. Like, you may be familiar with like whites only signs, or colors only signs, or, you know, blacks, you can come in and you can order your food, but you can't sit in here and you can't eat. Like, you pick it up from the back. So they wanted an opportunity to say, we're spending our money here, we, you know, are paying for services, and we like to be have equal opportunity to sit and enjoy our meals inside at the lunch counters as well. So you'll see, you know, a lot of them, they practice. The picture on the bottom right, you see the two gentlemen blowing smoke in the man's face. Like, they were practicing. Like, so no matter what people did, like if they spit on you, you know, blow smoke in your face, you see them cracking eggs over your head, or, you know, pouring sodas or pouring ice cream on you. Like, so you just sit and you be still and you be peaceful, and your presence is your protest. So that is what this is representing in terms of the sitting process. And obviously, you know, another violent, you know, scary, you know, very fear-inducing. But you can see, you know, through all that, they would come in there, have their books open, like reading, just trying to be peaceful, and just saying like, our presence is valid here, and we want an opportunity, you know, to enjoy our meals just the same. Marches, another opportunity in ways that students utilize their voices. You'll see this common theme. If we lost a civil rights, icon this year in John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis. You can see him at the forefront of the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Alabama. He's leading marches. He was a freedom rider. He did so much, and he was the face of students at that point in time. He's a former leader of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he integrated, he helped to, you know, publicly protest, and you can see that evident through his marches. Freedom Rides is another opportunity that college students came in from the North and from the South, you know, Black, white, and everything, and every color and race in between, just to kind of desegregate the transportation systems, which were heavily dependent upon during that time period. Birmingham, Alabama was a hotbed of a lot of civil rights. You can see, you know, people being attacked by the firefighters and the power pressure of their fire hoses, you know, police dogs being sicked on people. And another way that they just kind of stood, and their presence was their protest, students involved. And you see demands in other forms too. So from the Black Panther Party, a lot of those men college students. See one of our own panelists in his own right, being an student activist in the 1970s, Mr. Rick Adams. You get a chance to hear his story. Another picture of John Lewis in the middle, in jail protesting and demanding, you know, equal rights as well. And then just finally, you can see how that is translated, some of the same types of imagery that we see today, like has its roots in the past. So from the marching, from social media, hashtag social media didn't exist back then, but the ways that we are being public and saying, let's continue to fight for civil rights and social justice. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next segment of the presentation.
I cannot overstate the importance of the role of the student protests in the civil rights movement in the 1960s and 1980s. I know because I was one of those student protesters. Older organizations such as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People had been taking action against racial inequality since the early 1900s. Their chosen methods were court litigation. They set up a situation such as the famous Montgomery bus boycott that took place in 1955. They validated the law, had people arrested, and challenged the legality of that arrest to the courts. The famous Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas was another famous case that was finally argued through the United States Supreme Court. It took a year to resolve the Montgomery bus boycott. It took 4 years to win the decision in Brown versus the Board of Education. This was the slow, deliberate process used for seeking justice. The method was often successful, but painstakingly slow. In the meantime, a cloud was gathering. Young Black Northern college students were forced to go to Black colleges in the South because most white colleges and universities would not admit them. When these students entered these Southern colleges, they went to the towns surrounding the institution to shop and entertain themselves. As one young lady stated, here we were going off to college to expand our experience, get a good education, and improve ourselves. And we ran smack dab into Southern Jim Crow segregation with all those damn white and colored only signs. We were ticked off. The students went to the NAACP and the elders said that the students should be patient. They said that we were challenging the laws, but it would take some time for the laws to move through the courts. The students said they did not have years to endure the horrible oppression, so they decided to move on their own. They had experienced going to 5 and dime stores, which were small department stores, and being told that they could not eat at the lunch counter. The time was 1960. I was experiencing the same treatment in Pittsburgh at 3 such establishments by the name of Woolworth, Murphy's, and Kresge's. When I went downtown, I could shop at these stores, but I could not eat at the lunch counters. If I or anyone who was Black wanted food from these places, we could order the food, but had to pick up our food at the takeout counter and eat it everywhere. I eat it anywhere else. I was ticked off as well. On March 2nd, 1960, 200 Black, well-dressed college students from Tennessee A&I, Fisk University, and the American Baptist Theological Seminary descended on Woolworth's, Crest, and McClellan stores in Nashville, Tennessee. They sat at the lunch counters and asked to be served. They were not. On the second day they returned, they were beaten by Southern racists while police looked on. They persisted and were arrested. When one group sitting at the stools were arrested, another group took their places and endured the beatings and the arrests. 3 months later, as national and international newspapers and television stations observed these well-dressed, manly, young Black Americans being assaulted by police and rednecks, the world said, "Shame on you, America." These brave students integrated these previously Jim Crow establishments, and a new movement was born. I watched these events from my military station in Korea. I was consumed by anger. A few months later, I was standing in a military formation at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The racist Southern sergeant who was in charge of our unit announced that the Negroes were demonstrating in Nashville, Tennessee, not far from the camp. He said that what they were doing was illegal, and if we participated, we were going to military prison. I joined that movement, a move that changed my life forever. I blended in with the students and marched and demonstrated against the establishment. I joined a nonviolent movement, even though I was a very violent trained soldier. Dr. Martin Luther King was a new leader of the civil rights movement. He combined the techniques of direct action with the sit-ins created by the Nashville demonstration. The movement was still moving slowly until someone suggested getting high school students involved. You have seen the images, the old black and white videos of these students being beaten by police dogs, being washed away by high-pressure water hose, and arrested by police. These images caught the attention of the world. Soon, many Northern people joined the movement. Had it not been for these horrible images, many adults may never have become involved. Students shamed adults into becoming involved. In Pittsburgh, a group of preteen students led by a teacher, Dorothy Williams, demonstrated against segregated shoe stores in downtown Pittsburgh. The sight of these well-dressed young Black people picketing the stores led white people to stop buying shoes, and the demonstration was a success. Student protests moved adults to action. I was asked to leave the Southern movement because I could no longer allow myself to be beaten and watch others being beaten. A few months later, I founded the University of Pittsburgh chapter of the NAACP, and we began to investigate and protest against the University of Pittsburgh racist practices such as segregating blood at the Presbyterian University Hospital into Negro and white blood, racist admission policy, racism in sport, almost no Black instructors and administrators. They were not happy with me and managed to lose my scholarships, hoping that that would force me out of school, but I had other scholarships available. The Black Studies Department at Pitt was a result of Black students closing down the computer center and forcing the university to listen to their long list of justified grievances. The Women's Studies program at Pitt was the result of student protesters and faculty joining. Several programs at Pitt and around the country that made education more open and fair were a direct result of student protests. The television show I hosted, Black Horizons, was started as a result of student protests. So many Black television stars owe their success to student protesters. Many of the leaders of the gay movement and the women's movement learned their leadership skills as part of the student protest movement. Across the country, it was student protesters that carried the burden of the movement. Some died at Orangeburg College in Orangeburg, South Carolina. They were Black. Some died at Kent State and Ohio. They were white. They were shot to death by police and National Guard soldiers during protest movement. Student protesters joined in opposing the horrors of the Vietnam War. Students had found a new powerful voice. The movement of the 1960s and 70s would not have been successful without the fervent involvement of students. We had a new voice, a new way of changing the world. Then the student voices went silent. One day, after making a presentation on civil rights during the 1980s, I was approached by a white gentleman. He said, "I know you don't remember me, but I was one of the original members of the University of Pittsburgh NAACP. I was there when we did the protests and the marches and the sit-ins. I was really committed to making social change. Then I graduated, got a good job in corporate America, and focused on making a good living. Yesterday, I saw your name on the program, and I thought, wow, here we are 20 years later, and Ralph is still involved, and I am not. I felt so ashamed. I came to say that I'm so sorry that I stopped trying to change the world. I told him that I understood how that could happen. You joined a world where everyone looked like you and were focused on success. I understand because I was a part of that world for a very short time. But my thoughts were focused on why I was the only one who looked like me in this entire multi-million-dollar corporation. You blended in. I stood out like a beacon and asked questions. I don't blame you, but I'm so sorry your voice was no longer there to help." And so that was the case for many years. The fight for equality continued. We continued to raise our voices, but the college campuses were silent until this year. Suddenly, police realized that what Black folks had been saying for years, police kill unarmed Black men for no reason at all. You, the students, are vitally important. Your parents can't ignore me, but when you come home and say, you know what, Mom, Dad, Grandpa, Grandma, Uncle George, what Dr. Proctor has been saying is true, and I think what's going on is wrong. I'm going to march and protest inequality. You can help make a new world where your gender, race, socioeconomic class, or religion, or your social identity, sexual identity, your ability or disability makes no difference in how you are treated. I urge you to lift your voices once again and create a world that never really existed in America, a world of equality. You are not the leaders of the future. You are the leaders of today. Take your rightful place in shaping the future. Join us. Do not accept hurtful, wrong comments in any setting, education or otherwise. Ask why women are treated like girls. Ask why members of the LGBTQ+ community are not treated equally. Ask why the top administrative positions do not reflect the diversity of the communities educational institutions are supposed to serve. You are the consumers of education. Demand that the product you pay for is delivered in an equal and just manner. No matter how large or prestigious an educational institution is, remember that you are the consumer. It is your dollar that pays the bill. No educational institution could exist were it not for the students. Use your purchase power to demand equality now and forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Proctor, for those just passionate words, and also for your charge to this generation to continue to let their voices be heard. I will now turn it over to Rick Adams.
Rick, I don't think we can hear you. Under mute, there's an arrow, and it may give you a different microphone option under select a microphone.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, maybe that's why my picture showed up. All right, good morning, everyone. First of all, let me say to my big brother, Dr. Proctor, you challenged me to show my afro back in the day, and Titwana was nice enough to figure how to post that into her presentation. That was a picture of me in Maine at Bowdoin College in the early 70s. And probably the best way for me to frame my activities as a student activist is in this simple kind of diagram, if you will. 1963, I went to Westinghouse High School in the East End of Pittsburgh. In that year, of course, I unfortunately was able to observe or hear and learn about and experience with everybody else in America the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So I'm a 7th grader, and our teacher comes in science class after lunch and says, I just left the teacher's room and I understand we were told that President Kennedy had been shot. And at first, I started to almost laugh because in my mindset at that time, I said, that must be a joke. I later said, well, that's not funny. Why would he joke about that? But I sincerely thought that presidents getting shot were like McKinley, Abraham Lincoln, and way in the past. Well, little did I know, from 63 to 69 at Westinghouse High School, that I would see the assassination of Malcolm X, of Dr. King, of Robert Kennedy, and many, many others involved in the struggle for human rights. I really cut my teeth. Dr. Proctor talked about the Southern movement, and up here in the North, up South as we called it, we observed it, many of us, at least the young people, as something of being a spectator, looking at this. And I can remember almost a progression. We would go into the auditorium and we would see these pictures of dogs and hoses and cattle prods and horses and people who looked like me being treated very badly. And at first I was kind of inquisitive more than anything else and a little bit shocked. But I was wondering, what is this about and why are they doing these things to these people? And of course, that's our conversation that I took home and elsewhere, and we talked among ourselves. And what became curiosity then became, you all fight for your rights. Well, a little bit later, we understood that things weren't too cool around here in Homewood, in Pittsburgh. Might be a little different, not the de jure Jim Crow, but de facto Jim Crow. And that a lot of things were more similar than different. So we began to say, not you people go and fight for your rights, we support you fighting for our rights. And so at that time, I got involved in the community. A lot of the protests going on now, I can say that my first time being in a protest against police brutality was sometime in the late 60s, 67, 68, somewhere in there. And that we, in fact, there was a conference held in the community, an organization called FAT. And as students at Westinghouse High School, we formed our own organization, and it was SPCC, the Student Protest Coordinating Committee. And that was in honor of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And as much as I liked Dr. King and admired him, and I had been brought up in the church, Warren Methodist Church in the Hill District of Pittsburgh, somehow that didn't really grab me. But what did grab me was Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, Jamil Al-Amin, Rap Brown, talking about Black Power. So at that time, as a 16-year-old, thereabouts, young Black male, me and my colleagues, we took to that like a fish to water. And so you would catch us anytime chanting Black Power. And when James Brown came out with the song at that time, I'm Black and I'm Proud. We had the first little mini boxes you could carry around. And don't let like 10, 15, 20 of us, 50 of us get on a bus going somewhere. We'd all had that little player going, singing at the top of our voices, I'm Black and I'm Proud. So it was a mass movement that kind of swept me up, and I never looked back. I left Homewood saying I will be back. I will go and get education and come back and help my community. Found myself at Bowdoin College. And let me back up a minute. Before I went off to college, I began something in affiliation with Dr. King. As I mentioned, I had this interesting kind of relationship where I understood the power of nonviolence can convert somebody and change their heart. And even if they were a die-in-the-wool racist, they might convert if you treat them in a certain kind of way, as opposed to me going upside their head. And I could never debate or debunk that argument. Although still, as a young man, I wanted to fight. I wanted us to defend ourselves. So while in high school, the Black Panther Party caught my interest. But I also knew that we had to honor Dr. King and what he was trying to do, because if we couldn't do it nonviolently, I wasn't one that espoused violence. I believe in self-defense, but not advocating violence at all. So while I was a high school student and Dr. King was murdered and the school was shut down and the National Guard patrolled Homewood and we were under a curfew, helicopters flew over my house when I looked out the third floor window, and there was a Jeep with a machine gun on it at the corner above my home, the block that I lived in. I went to the school board and asked that they pass a resolution to make Dr. King's birthday a national holiday and a school holiday, and to advocate for that, which they did. I also went to the then Congressman Moorhead and asked that he introduce a bill in Congress that Dr. King's birthday be made a national holiday, which he did, one of the earliest bills. And later, following that trend, when I was at Bowdoin College, we advocated from the Afro-American Society that the governor of Maine issue a proclamation that year, which he did. So all through, I've had this kind of angst about what we needed to do to free our people, if you will. During that time, it was a tremendous time. There was a Vietnam War. You know, we closed the school down and went, the student council voted, and we went to DC, a bunch of us, to support the students that had been shot at Kent State. But also, less known to a lot of people is that Jackson State Black students had been shot. And so I was going there for a double reason. When I got out of Bowdoin College and I left with a double major in government and Afro-American studies, came back to Pittsburgh and graduated in '73, and there's a news clipping somewhere where in 1973, I was part of an effort. We had to form a group called COPS, C-O-P-S, Citizens Opposed to a Police State. So as you can see, with Black Lives Matter going on now, there's almost an unbroken line. And when the young people say how tired they are, I always laugh when I can tell them, well, for about 50 years, I've been tired. And so as Fannie Lou Hamer would say, I'm no ways tired because I'm gonna keep struggling. But the struggle is long. One person that I've gotten to know well and was mentored by and supported, Reverend Jesse Jackson, I remember him clearly the first time I heard him say that the struggle is both ancient and it's eternal. So it's never ending, if you will, unfortunately. Since being back, one of the things, I don't know how many people realize that the busway, the East Busway, is the Martin Luther King Busway. And I was instrumental in getting that name put on the busway. I'm kind of disappointed they have not extended it throughout the entire busway, because the initial rationale was that it went through low-income communities, middle-class communities, Black communities, white communities, the whole gamut, if you will. And it was a fitting symbol of one of the major tenets of what Dr. King was trying to achieve. I think I'll end here because I'm very excited about what questions can be raised and what answers and dialogue that we can share. But in my heart, I remain a student activist, committed to the mission. And I'm just very excited what young people are doing now. Student activists are special, partly because you don't know any better, but also you have the capacity to dream, that you can see change. And so continue as you are. I'll be there to support you, Dr. Proctor and others who you might call OGs or old heads or graybeards or whatever. But if you get that burning in your heart for social justice, it never leaves you.
Thank you, Mr. Adams, for, again, your impassioned words. I just wanted to make a note to just say that I've been very, very lucky in my work in this field, in D&I work. I look to Dr. Proctor and Mr. Adams. They have been mentors to me and role models to me. So I thank them so much for their leadership and guidance that has helped me in my professional and personal life. I would like to turn it over now to Dr. Jacqueline Cavalier, who will connect student activism to civic engagement for us. Dr. Cavalier?
Good morning. Good morning. It's difficult to follow Drs. Proctor and Rick Adams with respect to their vast experience that they're willing to share with us here today. That experience, those experiences available to us as an inheritance, and of course, we're honored for that, so thank you. I just want to share this image. Courage in women is often mistaken for insanity. These words are seen on bumper stickers, on posters. We see them on pins and the like. It's a phrase that might give one pause. Courage in women is often mistaken for insanity. It might give us a moment for consideration. It might be one of those historical quotes that we're familiar with, but we're not sure where it came from or who said it. Those profound words were delivered in response to the question, is she insane? The she in this case was Alice Paul, and the man who asked that question was the doctor who was asked to evaluate her as she sat in the district jail in Washington, D.C. in 1917 in the psychiatric ward. It was there that her tortured body was in full-blown starvation mode as she was forcibly fed as a consequence of her self-induced hunger strike. 3 years later, on August 18th, 1920, Alice Paul and her allies, like Lucy Burns and other loyal members of the National Women's Party, would unfurl a purple and white ratification banner from the balcony of their suffrage headquarters in Washington, D.C. The banner donned 36 gold victory stars, one for each of the 36 states that ratified the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, otherwise known as the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. That constitutional amendment, the 19th Amendment, would give women the right to vote. Under the leadership of Alice Paul and Lucy Burns, both college-educated, white, middle to upper class women, the National Women's Party worked to mobilize women from different walks of life, but many women were excluded. It's important to understand that these women were risk takers, but they also were concerned with political repercussions of their actions. They were not concerned with going to jail or being imprisoned for protesting, but they were concerned with political repercussions. And let me explain that further. With the deaths of 146 women, most of whom were immigrant women in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911, this was very fresh in many of these women's minds, because these women who become involved in the protests for suffrage were also involved in protests for wages, protests for working hours, some of which were successful and some of which were not. Those women who lost their lives in the horrific Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire of 1911 were very low on the socioeconomic ladder. They were predominantly Orthodox Jewish women, largely concentrated on the Lower East Side of New York, of Manhattan. In trying to mobilize those women, the mantra of the National Women's Party was, a vote is a fire escape. A vote is a fire escape. A vote meant fair wages. A vote meant a safe working environment. A vote was a voice in the government that could change laws. A vote was power for those who were otherwise powerless in a patriarchal society who made the laws for them. While this effort was a noble cause indeed, the movement, and particularly mainstream organizations like the National American Women's Suffrage Association and the National Women's Party, did not work to mobilize Black women in the same manner. Racism ran deep in the America and certainly in the Democratic Party of that time, and it spilled over into the suffrage movement. When we use the word movement, it always tends to suggest it's a unified effort, and oftentimes there's many splinters in that movement. And that is true for the suffrage movement. Mainstream organizations such as, I already mentioned, the National American Women's Suffrage Association, didn't even allow Black women suffragists to attend their meetings. The National Women's Party, under the leadership of Alice Paul, had to navigate through this racial divide in their relentless effort to lobby members of Congress and the Democrats in particular. At this time, the President of the United States was Woodrow Wilson, and he was a Democratic president. Their desire not to alienate the Democrats certainly was less than admirable when it came, of course, to promoting suffrage and racial equality for Black women. These flaws did not go unnoticed by people like Ida B. Wells Barnett, Mary Church Terrell, and other prominent Black female leaders of suffrage and other movements. Ida B. Wells Barnett was instrumental in the anti-lynching campaign, that she was an outspoken crusader in bringing that issue to the forefront. Racial prejudice cloaked in politics had no place in a movement where winning the right to vote was to serve, ironically, as an emblem of equality for all women. Upon request from Alice Paul and other members of the National Women's Party in the suffrage parade that took place in 1913, that women of color were to march in the back so as to not upset Southern delegates, Ida B. Wells Barnett responded, and I quote, "Either I go with you or not at all. I am not taking this stand because I personally wish for recognition. I am doing it for the future benefit of my whole race." She and other Black suffragists clearly understood the importance of representation on a much larger scale. And while Paul did not, and other activists believed that the struggle for suffrage had to be laser focused on suffrage, on winning that constitutional amendment, on winning the right to vote. Ida B. Wells Barnett believed that the struggle for racial equality and suffrage went hand in hand. Okay, that was very, very important. And so the suffragists who hold these banners are flawed. And it's important to understand that they were flawed. But they did undertake a risk, and that is the risk of protest. They're protesting a wartime president. World War I began in 1914, and the United States enters the war in 1917. But this is a wartime president. And so through the rain, the snow, the sleet, the inappropriate and degrading slurs that were thrown at them, just like the rotten food that was thrown at them, these women stood in front of the White House protesting the president for the right to vote. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? I think it's important that during this year, 2020, we celebrate the centennial of women. I say taking the right to vote. I don't say winning the right to vote. Women had to take the right to vote because that constitutional amendment would not have come along anytime soon if these women were not willing to go to prison, to embark on those hunger strikes, and to present themselves as political prisoners, which they were in America at that time, over 200 of them. But we also must look further to those women who did not immediately enjoy that right. Black women of the Jim Crow South certainly did not enjoy the right to vote. Native American women, ironically, were not even considered citizens in the United States at that time. They did not enjoy the right to vote. And the list goes on. So it is through the struggles of these women, the power of protest, and the quest for equality that strides were made. But there's so much further to go. And that comes through the power of protest, and for you to remember that a vote is your voice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cavalier. And in this upcoming election, we need to hear your voice. Please vote. And now I would like to introduce Dawn Reese, who is a true student activist right now. And we want to hear her voice. Dawn?
Good morning. I want to thank Ccac for hosting this event to give minority students, activist students, and ally students a chance to speak. I also want to thank them for connecting me with Dr. Proctor and Mr. Adams. We had a chance to speak yesterday about what was important to touch on here, and I think that it's a really powerful event that we're having. I personally got involved in activism when Antoine Rose was murdered by an untrained, unstable Pittsburgh police officer. I was so moved, I was in tears, and I decided that I was no longer going to sit and let occurrences like this happening without putting a voice to it. So I got up and I attended the protests. I went with friends and I reached out and made new friendships through organizations like Partners in Justice and Pittsburgh Allyship and the founder members of those organizations. We spoke yesterday about what it means to be an activist right now and be part of these movements right now. I think it's important to make sure that students are aware that you can be an activist and be vocal and informed and an asset without being boots on the ground. And by boots on the ground, I mean being actually marching in protests, and out in the streets, in the face of people. Right now, COVID is making it difficult for protests and for safe distancing and making sure that you're still being heard and not letting this fall away while maintaining those safety standards. There are many people who can't be boots on the ground now because of immune compromise and things like that. So we want to make sure to tell you that you can still be an activist, you can still be involved while sitting at home. There are tons of ways to be involved. Right now we have bail funds for the individuals that are being arrested at these peaceful protests. We also are encouraging everyone to write their local elected officials and encourage them to drop the charges against peaceful protesters. You can also call the DA's office to demand that charges against peaceful protesters be dropped. Attend local community meetings, attend your town meetings, attend your council meetings. Make sure that you're aware of what is going on in your cities and that you're knowledgeable about the people that are in power in the place that you reside. All of those things make a big difference in the background. If you can't be at a protest, you can still contribute to a protest. We constantly need water to wash pepper spray out of eyes. I know that Dr. Proctor and Mr. Adams mentioned fire hoses and protesters being sprayed with hoses. We are no longer doing that, but what we are doing now is spraying crowds of protesters with capsaicin, which is pepper spray, and rubber bullets. And I want to stress to you that when protesters tell you they were shot with rubber bullets, they are not speaking about tiny little bullets. These bullets are this big or larger. They are about this round, and they can tear a hole in your face. Black leaders in Pittsburgh during this time are being targeted. 2 of the leaders and founder members of the activist groups that I work with are being targeted. They are facing federal charges up to 20 years. They are accusing one of the leaders in Pittsburgh at this time with propulsion of a missile. And that sounds like a very serious charge. Mr. Adams, I can see the look on your face, and yes, sir, that is exactly what I said. Propulsion of a missile, as they're branding it for this charge, is actually them accusing him of throwing a brick. So throwing a brick became propulsion of a missile, which is makes it higher on the scale of charges. So he's actually facing several felony charges. And they are trumped up charges, and he is not the only leader. One of our leaders was actually pictured in the last slide of one of the presentations. And we want to make sure that everyone is aware that the city of Pittsburgh is targeting our leaders with these charges to try and take away some of their power. Several of the activists spoke to me last night before this presentation, and one of the most profound things that they had said to me was that they are, in essence, being lynched with these charges. They are being hung up so high by these charges. They're not sleeping. They can't get rest because the city is targeting them. The police are following them. They know where they live. They know where they work. They're being targeted at work for being an outspoken activist. So it can be fearful to be boots on the ground and be at these protests. It is a very serious thing, and it is not something to be taken lightly. But if you want to be involved, you can still do that from the safety of your home if you have COVID concerns or safety concerns. Because these protests start as peaceful, and then the city is pushing us and turning it violent. There was a protest in East Liberty that was a beautiful movement. Everybody was sitting together, chanting together. It was a very beautiful and inspirational situation to watch. The police arrived, demanded that they disperse. When they did not, they began firing rubber bullets and pepper spray. So we have not come as far as a lot of the political parties would like you to believe, and as far as a lot of everyday people would like you to believe. I've heard thousands of times recently that racism is not alive and well in America, and that's a flat out lie. If you cannot see that racism is alive and well in America, I'm here to tell you, you should probably take a longer walk down the street somewhere today. I am very privileged to be a part of this movement, and I will continue to be a part of this movement. I will continue to fight, and I will continue to work with Pittsburgh Allyship and Partners for Justice. One of the biggest things we want to do right now is encourage allies, give them the resources and opportunities they need, and connect them with ways to get involved. So please, if you're wondering how to get involved, please reach out to any of us. We can get you those connections. We can get you involved in those meetings. And we're happy to do so because this movement needs to continue. And I want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to speak today and for connecting me with Dr. Proctor and Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Dawn. You see the strong student voices we have. Please, if you are participating, if you are a student participating in this event, please reach out to us, to OIDI, and we can connect you with all of our speakers today. You understand that we need to continue to be seen, be heard, to make change happen. This is an amazing time in our history right now. If we cannot make substantive change happen at this time, in this climate, then when can we make it happen? We have to be active at this time. Before we move forward to the Q&A, I'd like to recognize and thank some of the other organizers of this event. Dr. Ashley Clark, who is the Campus Diversity Officer at Boyce Campus. Kate Farmer, who is a Student Support Specialist in Student Engagement at South Campus. And also Heather Cox, who has set this all up, our technical specialist, who is the assistant to the regional president. I'd like to thank you all for organizing this event. We are going to move forward to the Q&A, and I would like to let you know we might go over our time, but our speakers have agreed to give you additional time if you have questions. So, and I am thrilled to see that we have 97 participants for this event. And please know that we are going to continue to have these very inspirational, motivational events and focus on diversity and inclusion. So please keep your eyes open for those events. We have several in October, and that will be marketed to you. And please participate. Let's move on to Q&A.
Thank you so much, Samana. Dawn, we have a couple questions coming in about how students can find information on the meetings that you spoke about, and also how can they connect with these meetings and attend these meetings in our area.
Yes, thank you. I saw that. So there are multiple ways that you can get involved. Because of safety for our members and for members of the Black community, you can find us on Facebook and you can follow us there. We do typically kind of search and make sure that you actually want to be part of this movement and you're not just there for the wrong reason. So you can go on and find us as Partners in Justice on Facebook. You can find us as Pittsburgh Allyship on Facebook. We will get your request and then we will accept you into the group. We can give you any information you need. You can also reach out to me personally through my CCAC email address, which can be provided to all of you in the question and answer section. There are also a ton of other organizations that you can follow on Facebook. There is a Trans Lives Matter group on Facebook that is very active as well with the protests and making sure that Black trans lives are also being represented at these protests. They're a fantastic group and they have a lot of very helpful information about where and when you can attend protests and meetings.
Thank you so much, Dawn. The next question is, what is CCAC doing to dismantle white supremacist ideology that is internal to the institution? I'm not sure who would like to approach this question, but any one of our panelists.
I would like to mention quickly, I know at South Campus specifically, we do have a club, Society for Social Advocacy. We are slightly inactive right now because of COVID, but you can always feel free to reach out and join our organization of students led by Dr. Christopher Robinson and Darren Lesher. We are fighting to make sure that those events do not go unnoticed on campus and that anyone needs support can seek us immediately.
I would also like to mention that CCAC has a long history of recognizing and supporting and advocating for diversity and inclusion. We have the Office of Institutional Diversity and Inclusion that was first started by Dr. Ralph Proctor, and then also led by Rick Adams. And that developed a position, the special assistant to the president, that has authority and is a president's cabinet level position. Many institutions do not have that. We also have made inroads to hiring practices, looking at equity in hiring, building our diverse workforce. We need to make inroads into faculty to have more diverse faculty so our students do see individuals of color in the classroom. We are developing a system-wide diversity tactical plan that will look at diversity and equity in many different areas of the organization of the institution. That was also spearheaded initially by Dr. Ralph Proctor. We have made many strides, such as impact with things such as policies around religious observance, policies around change, preferred name. So we have impacted this division along with many other allies. We have impacted a lot of practices at CCAC that were not equitable and have tried to develop more equity across the college. And we continue to do so.
Thank you so much. The next question asks, 100 years later, and I believe this is to Dr. Cavalier, what is your assessment of the current women movement and the views in the 21st century, specific to the request for equality, taking the right to vote, and defining a historical moment in the upcoming presidential election?
That's a great question. I just want to preface it by saying I have been thrown off of my connection here twice. So fingers crossed that I can get through the question. My apologies if not. Well, I think that this is a crucial time in what we call the women's rights movement. And understand, again, I want to reinforce that what might be considered a right to me may not be the same for you, and vice versa. But holistically and more comprehensively, we tend to think that, you know, women have the right to vote. There tends to be, you know, equality, you know, across the board, and, you know, and all is good in the world. When in fact, there are many, many issues that are at the forefront. First of all, the Equal Rights Amendment. The Equal Rights Amendment has never been ratified. It's been presented to every session of Congress. Interestingly enough, it was ratified in January by the state of Virginia. It seems like so far away, I believe. And it then, of course, everything was interrupted with COVID. So the Equal Rights Amendment, interestingly enough, was written by Alice Paul. Alice Paul went immediately back to the drawing board after the ratification of the 19th Amendment. She authored the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923. So it's been out there for quite a bit. There are women who say we need the Equal Rights Amendment. There are other women who are saying there are other measures and legislation that is passed that makes the Equal Rights Amendment no longer necessary. We have the Women's March, which of course picked up numbers tremendously since 2016. With respect to Supreme Court justice appointments and rights that are embraced by women or certainly not by women. Roe versus Wade, which made abortion legal in the United States in 1973. That is a matter of concern when it comes to Supreme Court justice appointments. The big one is, of course, equal pay. Equal pay as far as women earning approximately 78 cents to every man's dollar. It is much more dire for women of color. And in Pittsburgh, it is significantly lower than the national average. So equal pay is an issue. So, you know, it's not necessarily a time to sit and be silent. And of course, again, your vote is your voice, but there's many other actions and activities that we can undertake to ensure that the rights that we value as women specifically are protected or are, you know, are achieved. I hope that addresses your question.
Thank you so much. Are there any legislation pieces at any level or the Supreme Court cases to follow right now that pertain to social justice or equality?
There were recent decisions in the Supreme Court regarding the LGBT community, as well as, I'm trying to think what the most recent one was, but there will always be active cases in the Supreme Court regarding equal rights, social justice. It's going to be very interesting to see what the composition of the Supreme Court will be moving forward and how that might impact things such as Roe v. Wade. So I would say to be actively involved in understanding what's going on, please stay on top of Supreme Court decisions. They will impact generations.
And Sumana, I just want to make a point too. It's not, we should always be aware too, as you clearly spoke of the, mentioned rather, the Supreme Court decisions, but understand that decisions made at the federal courts are extremely, extremely important. So those lower level decisions as well are equally, and can be equally important.
Absolutely.
Two areas that I've been very involved in recently in networking with people across the country. One is the war on drugs. So any of the legislation around, you may remember some years ago, for some reason, somebody decided crack cocaine was different than regular cocaine. And so African Americans and Latino and other folks that were less desirable ended up getting surprisingly longer sentencing and more draconian sentencing for basically drug abuse. So there's an entire push. The prisons are filled with something that really, if you do the investigation, came out of the Nixon administration when they wanted to crack down on demonstrators, black and white, who were protesting during what I call the political and social twin of today. That would be the late 60s, 68, and in there. We're in a similar cultural political period now. The other is I've had the pleasure to have worked with the Dean of the Congressional Black Caucus, John Conyers out of Detroit. And every year for 30 some years, he has put HR 40 up. And that is, first it was to study the idea of reparations. Now it is to study and to offer recommendations. And I'm part of a group, the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, that we have put a commission together, and there are actual bills now. For instance, tying the two issues I've just put on the table, in Evanston, Illinois, there's a fund being established that will go up to the amount of $10 million, at least initially. And the funding is coming from the sale now of what is decriminalized or legalized marijuana. In California, I'm part of an effort that we won the right that when these licenses come out, that there's money set aside for the victims of marijuana. Now we have people, mostly white men, some white women, very few minorities, who are now making money off of marijuana when there are people sitting in jail for 10, 20, and 30 years, have lost their income, have lost their reputation, still incarcerated. And those people need to be made whole. So the whole notion, you'll hear this concept more and more, reparatory justice, and that can be applied to environmental issues. There are a lot of people who suffer, Native people, and as I said, Latinx, and you name it. You just got to look. It's kind of dispersed in a way. Some ways, I feel like it's deja vu, as we were laughing yesterday, Doc, deja vu all over again. Yogi Bear's statement that people often quote. The more things change, the more they stay the same. And unfortunately, too many examples.
And I just wanted to add to Sumana's mentioning of one of the historic civil rights or social justice oriented Supreme Court decisions that came down in June of this year that extended, so it prevents sex discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. It previously only pertained to sex, but it extended those protections to sexual orientation and gender identity, which is huge, and it covers a wider gamut of protections for the LGBTQIA plus community.
Thank you so much. Another question's come in about social change that requires organizations-based social change. Well, CCAC offers social work courses. It does not offer much in the line of community organizing. Would the leadership be open to developing a community organizing program?
If I can just make mention from the social sciences department, and I'll defer then to Dr. Proctor, who can talk about some of the components of his course. Sociology course, I know there is a component, and especially Dr. Langstrat in our department has a component in his courses on social justice movements, with obviously a historical aspect to them, but also that's within the context of his sociology courses. And then Dr. Proctor, I think you have some components as well in the courses, especially with respect to the ethnic studies curriculum. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. One thing I want to indicate is that History 203 and 205 are African American Part 1 and African American History Part 2. Those courses are not just for Black people. Those courses are for everyone to understand what has happened historically throughout the United States and throughout the world. We don't just talk about Black people. We talk about Native Americans. We talk about women's rights. We talk about what happened to Latinos. We talk about what happened to Asians in this country. We have another course, ETH 114, which is Achieving Cultural Competence, which talks about the importance of cultures throughout the world. We have another course called Discrimination in the United States, which looks at all of the kinds of discrimination that have been going on historically and continue to go on. There are many courses, and Rick Adams helped us develop a couple of those. Rick, do you remember the names of a couple of those that you helped develop when you were in OIDI? We had a synergistic relationship between ethnic studies and ODID when we were developing other courses. I think one of them was current issues in ethnic and diversities, the role of ethnic identity in the global economy. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you hit them. Some important work that needs to be done, and many have put down some very critical work in this area. But when you start talking about national identity, ethnic identity, racial identity, and it drives me crazy because there's no such thing as races. We're all the same, if you will, species, but the differences are cultural and historical and national. So that even I consider myself a Pan-Africanist, which simply means that African people around the world are in communication and share a common destiny, history, and culture, and a current present as we interact with the international world. But once you do that, and I come out, as I said, I responded to the call for Black Power. So when you start defining that, well, Jamaicans will tell you I'm a Jamaican, and Nigerians will tell you I'm a Nigerian, and some of them will say I'm not Black, I'm not African. And so those are all legitimate identities, and that we need to figure out how to cross those when we talk about bringing all the family together. One of the most interesting social developments since the 60s is that there are many more, millions more continental Africans in the United States that weren't there when we first started talking about Africana studies, Black studies, and that kind of thing. Excuse me. So that reality has to be dealt with in the current context. We're much more of a global community. We always were, but now you can't hide.
And we've been fortunate. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I also wanted to mention that social work does have a course, SOW 130, that's a community resource course, and it does teach you how to locate the resources and organizations in your community that you should be looking for, how those organizations work, and how you can tie those all together to be really well-rounded in those organizations and pointing people in the direction of what they need.
I think it's important to mention too that our president, Dr. Bullock, has certainly reinforced as a priority our commitment to diversity and inclusion. As Sumana has already alluded to, we drafted 5 commitments to pushing this 5 larger commitments 5 commitments to pushing this larger commitment forward, and as well the leadership and through Dr. Bullock's voice has issued a number of statements with respect to the commitment to diversity and inclusion in response to earlier in the summer the killing of George Floyd, our commitment to diversity and inclusion and social justice as an institution, and then undertaking this much more formally as we move forward with curriculum so that we can ensure that every student who comes to CCAC and leaves to CCAC is exposed to diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism, which of course includes that need for social justice.
I'd like to just say, to piggyback on Dr. Cavalier, those commitments that we have made a pledge to, I'd like to go over those just for a moment and say again, the commitment is from the top of the organization, from Dr. Bullock to President's Cabinet, to directors, supervisors, faculty, staff. This commitment is critical. We are making a commitment to care, a commitment to serve the whole community with a focus on social justice, a commitment to build a culture of equity on campus, a commitment to identify and dismantle campus structures that breed disparities and then redesign the college for equity, and a commitment to fund what matters. Those are the 5 commitments that we have made and that we will continue to support and foster. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Sumana. The next question we have is for Dr. Proctor or Mr. Adams. Do you think that the resistance now is at the same level of what you experienced? And although this movement may be controversial to some people, will they see it as basic human rights in 30 years?
Rick, you want to start that?
I can get myself unmuted, yes. I've gone back and forth on that, and it's kind of hard to say whose oppression is greater or worse, sort of thing. It's how you feel it. Of course, if you get yourself killed, well, dead is dead. But in between there is such a range of things going on. In some ways, things are worse. I've never heard a president. For instance, last night, the comment was, stand back. Okay, that sounded pretty good. So he said, stand by. I'm like, stand by for what? And you're speaking to a militant, militia, some have said terrorist group, a white supremacist group. Never as covertly, a president may have had that kind of sentiment, but it was never said like that. Also, using the instruments of government in that way. I'll be the first to say, there's a movie, the Mississippi Burning, which I detest because it shows the FBI as a hero in the civil rights movement. And Doc Proctor and others will testify how if they were present, they stood by and like took notes and did nothing. They knew about Klans people who were plotting to kill folk, and they let them kill folk. And many had the attitudes of the folks that we were opposing. But now we have a situation where the president has pulled up Homeland Security and TSA and these groups of paramilitary law enforcement types who can show up in one city in a kind of extraordinary deployment and not even have identification on. Here in our own city of Pittsburgh, I saw the clip, as you may have seen the clip, where the police department had a white vehicle, a van, and they pulled up and snatched somebody off the street. And they came out with their rifles. There was no need for that. I mean, that's police terror. That's the kind of thing that in Argentina and Chile and many countries, they have a unfortunate legacy of thousands of people who disappeared, were snatched off the street like that, never to be seen again. So we need to be careful with facial recognition cameras, with these phones we have, with GPSs in your car. And we now see an unraveling of a grand jury in the Breonna Taylor case, where folks are manipulating the law. Our own Attorney General spoke about the Mueller report and essentially said what he wanted to say. The report did not say. I mean, there's some things we ought to be deathly afraid about. The fragility of our democracy has been demonstrated. We have someone who's just, I'm not going to show you my taxes. The Attorney General was my own personal lawyer. I mean, you can go on and on and on. If we don't restore this, we may never recover from this. So as bad as things have been, there was some civility, there was some veneer. You might want to call it the illusion of democracy. But I'm telling you, when they start saying these ballots count, and I'll end with this one. When should ballots be invalidated because they were, quote, late? The president is trying to suggest, for example, that November 3rd, all votes need to be counted. That's never been historically correct. I don't have to do any research. Back in the day, I mean, part of Juneteenth is about how long it took just physically to get from one part of the country to the other. So we have a national election. Back in the day, it wasn't all finished on the day of the election. That's absurd. And then even if it isn't, what difference does it make? All votes should need to be counted, or else we don't have a democracy.
Let me also indicate and piggyback on what Mr. Adams has said. These are the most dangerous times in our history. I have never felt more hopeless about democracy than I do now. I feel that all of the years that I put in the field, being shot at, being jailed, being beaten, being spat upon, have been a waste. I see all of those things that we gained going down the tubes. I've never in my life thought I would see that there would be a time when the President of the United States was challenging our basic freedoms. We are in serious trouble. Our democracy is in danger. I really thought that when I left the South in 1961, and when I sort of retired from the civil rights movement, Well, I really never did that, but I thought that we were on our way to freedom. I thought we were on our way to justice. I thought we were on our way to a society that was equal in many respects. Now I see women's rights being eroded by the Republicans and the president. I see gay rights being stomped upon. I see Black rights being taken away, like the right to vote, etc. So I think we are in a most perilous time in our history, and the president and Congress, Senate, are trotting out laws that have been on the books since the 1960s, where they can arrest you, put you in jail, and not charge you with any crimes, and you just sort of disappear. I was on 2 assassination lists by some of the organizations that the president is saying are good organizations. They're good people. I have lived in the belly of the beast. Those are not good organizations. What he does not understand is they're not only anti-Black, anti-women, anti-Jewish, they're anti-government, and he is rallying them. These are the most perilous times in our history. I urge you to take this seriously. Now, do everything you can to make certain that we survive as a democracy. We are in serious danger on every aspect of our democracy. I can't say that strongly enough. We have to take whatever measures we have to take. There are people who are pushing for a race war. There are people who are arming themselves to kill Black folks. Again, these are, I'm on the street. I hear what's going on, and it is not as pleasant as you think it is. And as Don has indicated, those weapons that are being used are not little nice things that'll harm you just a little bit, bounce off your skin. Oh, they're only rubber bullets. Rubber bullets can kill you. Do you understand? Rubber bullets can kill you. Electric, tasers can kill you. Being hit in the head with a gun butt can kill you. People are vanishing from streets. And what are we doing about it? Now, why are we not saying to the government, to the Senate, this stuff has to stop? I used to look to the world and they thought America was great. Now they're afraid of America. We are no longer respected. These are dire times.
If I can follow up on a statement that Mr. Adams and Dr. Proctor touched on, you do have to be extremely careful as an activist right now to cover your face. The individuals that I was speaking about, the 2 Black leaders that we have, they did not cover their face. They were out there, they were vocal, they were in the open. They are now facing 20 years or more of federal charges. They are receiving death threats, just as Dr. Proctor mentioned. There are assassination lists. This is not a joke. This is not just marching down the street. This is not something to be taken lightly. So if you're going to be out and you're going to be active, I encourage you to do so and do so safely, but cover your face. Turn off the GPS tracker on your phone. Make sure that the things that are put in place governmentally to track you are not being used against you. Because the other thing that I want to make clear is these charges are not simply to put that individual in jail. A lot of these charges don't stick, but what they're doing is they're using these charges to take away your credibility as an activist, your credibility as an educated professional, and your credibility as a person. Once they charge you, if you do get those charges and those charges stay with you, they use that to suppress your ability as an activist and as a leader to enact change, because once you're charged with a felony, there are certain rights that the government makes sure that you are no longer eligible for. So please be very careful about protecting your identity.
So at this time, we do not have any further questions in our chat. So we thank you all for your participation. I just wanted to provide Suman an opportunity to give closing remarks, but I wanted to just indicate that we do not have any additional active questions. Thank you to the over 50 of you who have stayed on past our 11 o'clock end time. This has been a great discussion and conversation, and there'll be more opportunities in the future. So with that, Sumana, any closing remarks?
I would just like to echo that and thank everyone. We brought this panel together for a reason. These are individuals who are committed to social justice and equity, who have spent the majority of their lives in trying to promote equity for all. And I just want to say that we are very fortunate to have all of these individuals in our institution with this type of content expertise. I would like to just remind you that we will be continuing to have these discussions. And if you have ideas that you would like to give to OIDI around programming, please feel free to do so. And again, remember the 5 commitments of the institution: a commitment to care, a commitment to serve the whole community with a focus on social justice, a commitment to build a culture of equity on campus, a commitment to identify and dismantle campus structures that breed disparities and then redesign the college for equity, a commitment to fund what matters. These are lofty goals, but we can all work together to make them happen. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Thank you all.
John, Katwana, Jackie, Ralph.
Take care.
Take care.
Thank you so much, everyone.